Hey, everybody, this is David Bloom with Next TMT Talks here with my co founder, Daniel Frankel, and a special guest, Dana Protsyshak, who is not only the progenitor of the first vertical drama market here in Los Angeles about 4 or 5 months ago now. I think it was back in September or October, if I recall, when I first met her. And along the way, she also writes, directs, produces, as Dan joked, does craft services for vertical dramas, those low cost, vertically oriented shows that are becoming a hot thing in Hollywood. Everybody from our beloved occasional sponsor Cineverse up to the biggest companies like Disney Plus are now showing off vertical dramas and creating space for them. Netflix has some stuff that's more promotional or clips from their shows, but clearly it's something that's working in Hollywood. We've got a new contract from SAG-AFTRA to cover these less expensive, smaller budgeted shows. So it's kind of here. So what are you seeing, Dana, and where is it going?
Right now, I feel like it's gold rush. So everyone wants in. Even the people who were like 1 year ago were super skeptical about this market, that they thought that it will be just another Quibi. Right now, they all want in. And we have even more opportunities for content creators because every app, every production, they all need content. So I know that what I see on LinkedIn, what I see from my business partners, everyone is looking for writers, for new stories, even for special stories for AI generated verticals. So I feel like right now we are in a completely different mode for verticals than we were like 1 or 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's really
So,
interesting to think about because Quibi, of course, is the thing everybody thinks about. Well, that was a $1.75 billion blowout of a whole burn of a whole lot of cash. These are the exact opposite in everything other than the vertical orientation. It seems like even the construct of minute and a half episodes, maybe 80 of them to sell for a buck a piece, is a totally different dynamic than what Jeffrey Katzenberg's creation was trying to do.
that's my question. How are you monetizing these things for the most part? Is there any advertising or is all pay as you go? What's the
So, like for creators, you just get money for production. You don't have like any backend deals. So basically, you just get paid for project. For apps, it's usually in-app purchases, advertising, subscriptions. From China, it's mostly in-app purchases. Here, it's mostly subscription, points, all of that.
Right. So it is dynamically different from what the Chinese market, where this all started, and where it's a huge business now,
right?
right? And the transformation over here to California to the U.S. has been, they need a different funding model that just didn't work, where you were basically doing what's the equivalent of mobile gaming business models. And I don't think that's worked quite as well, it seems like.
What
So,
I think
sure.
the best way to make money is trademark the captured by the mob boss story format, and you can make a killing. I mean, most like every one of these things I want, every purveyor of this content seems to have that particular story arc. I was happy then the mob boss captured me. Oh no, he wants to have sex with me.
You don't know about the secret werewolf billionaire boyfriend genre, clearly, right? Dana, that's a big one. And
I was
you can't trademark that because it turns out that's a real thing. There are secret billionaire werewolf boyfriends out there.
I was asking about genres earlier, and Dana informed me that this isn't the first time she's been asked about that. But you had some pretty interesting things to say about the development of the market and the expansion of that capability.
Yeah, I would say I want to go back that Chinese model is very different from US one because in China they treat vertical dramas as content.
Right.
In Hollywood, they treat it as filmmaking. So that's a big difference in their approach.
The different mindset is what you're saying, just in terms of how how respectful they are, or what?
Not even that, like for content, it's mostly what works. Just clickbait, fast consumption for the audience. And here they want to make cinematic verticals. They care about how it looks, they care about story, and they want to make elevated verticals. And they care more about their crews.
Well, that's interesting. So that actually that artistic ambition is worthwhile. It doesn't really fit the Chinese model, which is just get it out there and then use data to mercilessly optimize A/B tests and all that stuff to see what's working, what's not, what headlines are working, what storylines are working. When a storyline's not working, you got to perk it up. You've got to really you're just doing it like you would do a video game, a mobile video game, right? And then you're saying there's a little bit more artistic ambition here with more involved storylines. Are they moving beyond the sort of romance, fantasy, romantasy kind of stuff more now in the US with those kinds of ambitions?
Gamma Times, a US-based app that was founded, I guess, like 5 or 6 months ago by Bill Block from Miramax. They are doing most like true crime. They have writers from CSI, so they position themselves as a completely different app. Other apps, they've been trying to do a bit of Lifetime, a bit of horror, but it doesn't work that well, because it's hard for horror fans to find that one horror on Real Short, for instance. We already have like 40 or 50 romance shows. But I feel like right now it's like the whole vertical, they started basically from novel adaptation. There are a lot of book libraries, romance book libraries in the world, and they've been just adapting IPs from there. Right now, they are doing a lot of like, they are turning books from Wattpad into movies. And
Oh,
now
sure.
they're crediting the writers. It hasn't
Right.
happened before. Now they're crediting writers. They
Oh,
want to get their audience. And I also feel that in vertical dramas, basically they are trying to mirror book talk trends. Like there were like a huge story about like Face on book talk, and now we have the same shows.
Can you talk about your background, how you came to Hollywood? Were you doing vertical dramas when you came here, or is this something that you got into once you already went down the road? Did you do long form?
My Hollywood dream was to come here to make a show for Netflix, my dystopian sci-fi show,
When was that?
big horizontal show. It still is. I came here like 1.5 years ago. It still is. I feel like Verticals, it's one step closer to the dream. It's a very good film school. It's what's working. It's how you can test your idea. It's how you can grab audience for your ideas. I started in Verticals like in the very beginning when they came to North America in 2023 as a writer. And then I moved to production, and now I'm directing and writing my stories as well.
Dana, you came from the Ukraine, obviously difficult place to be trying to make movies. I was heartened to see the strong, warm reception the Ukrainian team at the Olympics received. That was nice. But it's a difficult place to try to make movies these days, unless you're doing, I guess you're doing true, technically it's a true crime what's going on, but so you came here to try to pursue some of your Hollywood stuff in a more traditional way, but this opened up and it was a real opportunity and it's really taken off. And I think I want to give you some credit for creating that market because one of the things that I found so interesting when you and I talked in the fall, it's there wasn't a market to find this stuff, to buy, to meet with creators, to buy properties, to build up pipelines of content coming in. But there also wasn't a journalism infrastructure writing about what's the good stuff or here's the horror thing. There weren't awards. There weren't any of the things that have built up in Hollywood over the last 100 years, right? That help support and feed fans and give people a way in and to understand what's good and what's less good and all that. I mean, all that's still being constructed still, right?
Yeah, it's still all in the making. It's a very new industry. And I'm glad that the market was basically one of the first steps into this. After it, I feel like this market, because we are doing the next one in May, it will be more focused on independent creators. 1 year ago, apps had like basically the monopoly on content. They had their IPs, they were looking for production companies who were just executing what they needed. And right now, basically, more and more indie filmmakers, they turn to verticals. So instead of doing their features, instead of doing their short film, they are making their verticals. So I guess in May we'll see a big market for those people who want to sell them, and also from emerging apps who desperately
What's
need
what's a
content.
big budget for a micro drama at this point? What if somebody's spending lavishly? Well, what will the money be?
Like average budget is like from 150 to 200. So like 250 would be a
And just again, SAG-AFTRA's contract ceiling is 300,000 or less. So they clearly believe there's a whole lot of production going on below $300,000, which is a pretty modest budget compared to, most traditional stuff coming out of Hollywood. But they're just trying to build an infrastructure and relationships, I think, at this point with this burgeoning area. But 250 sounds lush. Wow, we can have pretzels.
So how many people work on a production like that? How many people work on a crew?
Say like it's around 25 people top.
Right. And for a TV show, how would that compare?
I'm sorry, I never worked on TV show, but I guess it will be like
Is
three
it
times at least that much.
It
right?
could easily be 100 or more, sure. The other issue, of course, is the cost of talent. And a lot of folks who are coming up, they don't command a big budget yet. Some of them are getting some fame or notoriety and are now able to command a little bit more for their rate to be in these things, right? There are a few names already popping up as like, oh, that's a vertical star, which is one of those things that I think the industry, such as it is at this point, needs to be able to take that next step. It's got to have stars, people that people want to watch. And that could also be directors and writers and all the rest because it's all about it. It has a very unusual form, though, in terms of these very short episodes where you're basically building a cliffhanger at the end of every minute and a half, right? Isn't that basically it? Certainly it's the case in the Chinese dramas, correct?
It definitely is. It's very fast paced, but I also feel like that's changing. So it is like every episode ends on cliffhanger just because we have coin subscriptions, like subscription and coin model. So you need to be like, okay, what happens next? But because of the stars, because of better stories right now, I feel like it's more about people still want to watch this. So it's about like showing people what they will see after the paywall and making them fall in love with the characters and the story, so they will just go past the paywall.
What
So
is the Squid Game of sorry, Dave, but what is the most popular vertical drama at this point?
Right now, I know that like one of the biggest hit just launched on Drama Wave. I guess it was like 1 week ago. It's called Every Sunday I Run Into You. It's like very nice vanilla rom-com basically, but the trends they are changing like every week.
Is that Chinese or where did that come from?
It was shot in US for Drama Wave.
So Drama Wave is one of the subscription platforms that's in the US with a slightly different business model. There are a few of those now at least. And then some of these big companies are either creating their own stuff online with probably a very different business model. It's like it's just part of the subscription to engage you. Right. So a really interesting time. Well, Dana, I think we got to let you go. You've got miles to go and people to see and everything else. It's delightful to see you again. And you've got your next conference is going to be when and where?
It will be May 7 to 10th, same place, Fair Factory in Hollywood.
Okay.
We will have 4 days instead of 3.
And you'll be at Intech as well.
Yeah, but where can people, if they want to get involved in that, where would they go? What website would they go to?
They'll go to
LAverticalDramaMarket.com, and there they can get tickets. They can try to show off their wares or all the rest. Well, thank you, Dana Protsyshak, for joining us. It's delightful to see you, and this is such a fast-moving market. I feel like we probably need to talk to you about every 2.5 months just to see the 47 different things that are new since the last time we talked. Thank you so much, Dana.
Likewise.
It was lovely to talk to you again and see you on TechFest.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll continue on with the rest of the podcast real quickly. Daniel.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Dana. And Daniel, it's been an interesting week of the Super Bowl Olympic bomb vortex of hype.
Before we get into it, what did you think of the halftime show with Bad Bunny?
That was fine. That was pretty good.
I am not a lover of halftime shows.
Yeah.
I've never liked the Super Bowl halftime show. They're too loud and just people yelling in a microphone. This was really thought out, well executed. I kind of learned a Latin flavor. I kind of live here and are on the edge of it.
Kind of do in your neighborhood. Yeah, absolutely.
It had an aesthetic I really appreciated.
Yeah. Though Puerto Rico is very different from the substantially Mexican populations I suspect live near you. But, and each country has its own culture that spills over when they come to the United States and live here for a few generations and all the rest. But obviously, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. His sort of defiant decision to just sing in Spanish, because that's who he is part of his, I think, really winning,
Well, definition of America is all of North America, but also all of Central America, Latin America, or South America.
The thing is, he actually owns the Western Hemisphere. All those
Spotify numbers will attest to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's been the most streamed person on Spotify for 4 years. He had a bigger tour, I believe, than even Taylor Swift in terms of revenue that it grossed. He did a 30 or 31 day residency in Puerto Rico and in the capital in San Juan this last summer. I mean, he's the real deal. He won Best Record at the Grammys and Best Urbana Musica, a Grammy as well. He's hosted Saturday Night Live, but our only president doesn't know who he is. So maybe that's for
Yeah, I feel like you can't stay out of the way of that topic. We seem to intersect with it quite a bit this week in the issue.
Seemed like it. But we weren't even trying. But, next week we'll try harder. But that being said, for instance, at the opening ceremony for the Olympics this week, our only vice president showed up with his possibly eyeliner. I call him his eyelinerness as opposed to his highness. J.D. Vance and his wife, his pregnant wife, Usha. Congratulations to her and them for their fourth child. Showed up and apparently were booed when the U.S. team came in and they flashed to Vance's face. But NBC did not carry that, nor did they carry the boos for the tiny Israeli team.
So that clip that we included that I showed you, was that Canadian or what was that? Was that a different broadcast?
Pretty much everywhere but the United States.
Because they acknowledge that he was booed. They don't get into it. They kind of move on quickly. But it's too obvious to ignore.
Too obvious to ignore. And as we noted, they still have Versant and Brian Roberts, Comcast, Versant, as we like to say here in our French broadcast for our French audiences. They still got business to do. Versant is doing a lot of business, as you pointed out this week. Not just that deal for free TV, the FAST operation a few weeks ago, but a bunch more stuff. And some of that stuff's going to require sign-offs from people who are suspicious, shall we say, of any of these big national media companies, international media companies, and have been performing their suspicions in Congress when Ted Sarandos and one of the top Warner Brothers executives traveled to a Senate committee hearing and got beat up some. But Brendan Carr, big shock, more stuff. It kind of hits on all cylinders. We'll see how much of this ends up being something. They keep losing in special elections, which doesn't bode well for the general election for the Republicans and their plans. So they may want to try and ramp things up even further.
I tell you what, though, it makes for, I'm kind of turning what we do into C-SPAN on some days, and I apologize for that. But some of this congressional testimony, some of these Brendan Carr policy speeches, they're really compelling. They're really consequential. And I think you kind of mentioned it briefly just now. Ted Sarandos was in front of a Senate committee last week talking about the merger. He was with Warner Brothers Discovery, CRO. And he was, the hearing was ostensibly to talk about antitrust issues and competitions. And Mike Lee, a Utah Republican, chairman of the committee, does a pretty good job of setting that up. Cory Booker weighs in and we're on topic. And then all of a sudden we're not.
A couple of Missouri senators from my old home state, and we understand now again why David left his home state. So there's that, Josh Hawley and what's the guy, Schmidt?
Eric Schmidt, I think. Yeah.
Well, don't confuse him with the guy who used to run Google and one of the wealthier people in the world.
Or Mike Schmidt, the Phillies third baseman.
Yeah, either one. They both kind of whiffed as they did their, they were playing to their MAGA crowd. And but the culture war stuff doesn't matter, and they're spending all their time on that. And there's a real legitimate question about what counts as antitrust in this era and what counts as a market when Netflix is part of SVOD, but not the biggest one. Disney's bigger, YouTube's bigger, but they're big and they'll get a little bit bigger. It turns out not as big as you'd think when they add Warner Brothers and HBO Max. So what counts as a market?
Well, it's a really legitimate question, the antitrust issue. And the consolidation of two major suppliers, the biggest one of all, buying something else. And I think Ted Sarandos, who is as cool and calm as they come in a Senate hearing, has a pretty good response. The actual percentages of market share increase are not dramatic, but he spends most of his time kind of being befuddled by the study that Hawley and the rest of them, Ted Cruz weighs in at one point, 41% of your children's content indoctrinates LGBTQ or is transgender propaganda. And this is quoted like 3 or 4 times.
Yes.
And it comes from the Heritage Foundation. It's a study that describes Netflix as a deep state tool of the federal government, as if the federal government still leftist. And Greg Peters and Sarandos and Reed Hastings, they're all like carrying hammers and sickles. It's utterly ridiculous. Yeah. So you've got that backdrop against what should be a really kind of sober discussion about competition. And then Schmidt, who says, the American people are fed up with your content and don't like it. And Sarandos has got to sit there and sort of take it because he wants to keep this deal alive.
Yeah.
But saying, well, who the hell is watching Bridgerton? All these
The billions of hours that they're serving up include some Americans, including tens of millions of Americans who clearly have choices. They are paying for the opportunity to see this stuff. They are willing to pay for it. And if somebody else doesn't want to, there are other options. It turns out there are other things. And I would only point to Paramount, which wants to provide some more options. I would point to Amazon, which spent that $75 million on the
David,
Melania doc.
I'll just say one more thing about it. I'm secure enough in my masculinity to say that I watched Bridgerton. I'm going to watch 2 more episodes tonight.
Okay.
And
I like it too. A lot of
the actress who plays the queen and her right hand. Schmidt was talking about race replacement, supplanting actors of color into roles that should be filled with white people. It's like you cannot find 2 actors that are better for those roles. I don't care what the hell their race is or their creed or their gender. They're fantastic at it. There's a reason why it works. It appeals to a broad segment of audience. It's wide open for women, kids, middle-aged, puffy adults, men like me. Anybody can come in. And
I think that the esteemed senator is confused that he thinks Bridgerton is actually a documentary of Regency era British morals and mores, and it ain't. It's a fantasy confected by the wonderful, incredibly talented, incredibly productive Shonda Rhimes that has been hugely successful, one of the biggest hits on the biggest streaming service. Clearly, lots of people don't have any problem with a black Queen of England. They even have a backstory on it that's very interesting. If you dig that up, there's a little side series about.
Oh, I watched it. Yeah.
Yeah. But the way that how they get there is sort of interesting. But the real point is, if you are secure in your masculinity, I'm thinking some people are insecure in their whiteness, because it's like, dudes, this is just a TV show and it's not based on reality. It's clearly not. Because the fact is that they were really racist back then, but at least they stopped slavery before the United States did. So more power to them.
It's almost like there's not like this acceptance, this party that like supposedly aligns itself with capitalism. I mean, these wise marketers of consumer products realize that if you open up your content and make it accessible to the broadest amount of people that you can, you will make more money.
Turns out that's why Bad Bunny was doing the halftime, because Bad Bunny is good business for Apple and for NBC because they want to crack that Latino Spanish speaking market, and this guy is huge and with a whole lot of people, some of whom
I had this. You're absolutely right. My 20-year-old son, we were talking about this tonight. He said, "We've had Taylor Swift. That would be more of an appropriate because guys like me, athletes, we've heard of her and we listen to her." It's just like, well, you ever think that you're going to watch the Super Bowl anyway? There's a whole lot of folks in Latin America will tune in just tonight and perhaps be indoctrinated into the cult of pro football because you showed them Bad Bunny.
And let me tell you, Roger Goodell thought that. Because Roger Goodell, as they point out on the broadcast, Roger Goodell has 9 international games, the most ever, scheduled for next season. And they are pushing hard into Europe, but they're pushing hard into Mexico and South America as well. They had games in Mexico City, and I want to say Rio de Janeiro this year. They definitely understand what the Western Hemisphere should be open, and having Bad Bunny on your side is not a bad idea. But it gets to some very complicated stuff about sort of a Christian white nationalism that I will not bore my beloved listeners with, but that is a real thing that helps animate a portion, not all, but a portion of those folks on the right these days. And their coalitions, I think, facing some strains as they try to figure out how to say things that are not Nick Fuentes adjacent, but do some of the things that they want to have done and protect family and God and all that. But it's a very complicated line that they're going to draw. But meanwhile, big global brands like Apple and the NFL are busy partnering with people that talk to a much broader audience. That means a lot more, makes a lot more money, spends a lot more money, and matters a lot more in the long run.
Come to realize that woke just means good business sometimes. Like, go woke, go broke. It's kind of the opposite.
Yeah, woke versus sleeping, I guess, is the alternative. So the sleepy ones, are trying to figure out what's going on as the world changes around them, and that's just what it is. Now, all that being said, it's worth noting that Antenna put out some stats, and I included them in the newsletter this week, about the big global sports streaming rights spending.
That was pure analysis.
Yeah,
Right.
Ampere. I'm sorry, Ampere, not antenna. I apologize.
Yeah.
Ampere. And up 7% to 14 billion in spending, led by Amazon with its 1.8 billion or 1.7 billion dollar NBA deal this year. But right up in there now, punching into the top five is Paramount Plus with that 1.2 billion it spends now per year on worldwide UFC rights, which is a very expensive deal, but one that gives them, to put it gently, a puncher's chance in many markets that they are only beginning to enter.
I thought that was a really interesting inclusion. I was a little surprised that the total net was about 14 billion. I thought it would be more than that.
Right.
And I was also shocked most of the
But these are for global rights, okay? It's
right,
not
I
just
understand.
like the English Premier League rights that Peacock has are only for the US. Obviously, are not for Europe or England or any of that stuff. And no one would see it on Peacock in Europe anyways. But, for instance, they've got the NBA rights, but, they don't have a global reach. So it's a little bit different dynamic. So it is interesting. And the other thing, though, about market concentration, and again, back to our conversation about antitrust, is the five biggest have gone from about 31% of the market to, I think, 44%. But that's split five ways, which is meaningful. But like HBO Max and Warner Brothers has some significant rights to sports stuff in Europe. They have a few odds and ends still here now that they've lost the NBA, but they're not a meaningful top 10. So on the sports rights side, the most important and lucrative corner of live linear programming in TV these days, Netflix still wouldn't be that much bigger. Again,
Right.
what's your market? What's being dominated? What's being controlled? How do you define it? And how do you make it fit under any reading of our 125-year-old antitrust laws built for the railroad barons and Standard Oil? Should be a fun conversation, but all the stuff that goes on in Congress doesn't really matter with that because that will have to be decided if the Department of Justice decides to go after them in court. I suspect what will happen is what happened when AT&T bought Warner Brothers. If it gets
Right.
to the point, which is it'll take a couple of years, the DOJ will put on a laughable case because that's what they did under Trump 1. They'll get their butts kicked, and AT&T will go ahead. I don't think Netflix will make a hash of things the way AT&T did because Netflix actually seems to know what it's doing mostly, and it's actually in the same business.
Warner Brothers shareholders say, yeah, let's take the Paramount bid. I don't want to go through this process, this litigation. Is that possible?
But anything's possible here. But I mean, so far the redemptions have been minuscule. I've been a little surprised how small they've been. It was just a couple. It was a few percent out of the. You need to get something to make it problematic. You probably need to get up to like at least 35%. And then it's like, ooh, okay, it's getting a little close here. But 6%, I think, 6 or 7%, I think was the last I saw 10 days ago. So it's going to need to be more than that minuscule redemption rate. Like we'll throw our, and some of the people that threw their shares in said, I'm doing it mostly to get more money out of Netflix. So, which they kind of did because they forced Netflix to do an all cash bid as opposed to some debt.
I'm going to change the subject on you real fast. You know what?
What?
I'm going to change the subject on you real fast, if you don't mind. Just
Okay.
real quickly. Did you watch that video included of Tina Brown interviewing Gabe Sherbin about his new Rupert Murdoch book?
No, I haven't. I've managed to control my enthusiasm for more criminology about the Murdoch clan.
Real quickly, I've been on a little bit of a Murdoch bender with the start of the California Post. It's everything I thought it would be. There was they're railing about the biggest, most deadly gangs in Southern California have combined forces, and homicides or in Los Angeles are at record lows. But please stoke fear. They went after Karen Bass, the mayor. Every day they go after slick Gavin Newsom, and it's just to watch them try to execute here. They'll probably succeed. Anyway.
But no. But we don't want to lose track of this because just as with the Melania documentary, which made much of the fact that it had the best open, reputedly, of any doc in ever, I think it ended up being like 7.5 or something like that billion.
Let's say that might be overblown.
It might be overblown. Maybe it's not. Maybe they got 7 million people or 7 million worth of tickets sold, whether it was bulk purchases or people walking in and actually buying it, then going on Rotten Tomatoes and saying it's the most amazing documentary ever. Fine. This weekend it fell off a table. It was going to be 9th or 10th in the box office. It'll end up with probably 10 million, maybe in box office on a $75 million spend across 25 or 6 countries. In business, pure business terms, that is not a success. I jokingly in last week's column talked about how Amazon bravely had gone out and was spending $75 million to buy, market, and distribute 15 Sundance films. And then it was like, oh, wait, no, they didn't. And, or to save hundreds of jobs of the Washington Post. Oh, wait, no, they didn't do that either. No, they did it, a useless, kind of vacuous, not really there documentary of the 20 days before Melania put on a funny hat that her husband couldn't give her a kiss under, and went to the inauguration. Okay, thrilling stuff. I mean, no better or worse than a bunch of hagiographies that have come out there for documentaries in the past, but they didn't cost $75 million.
I had this argument on social with several conservative colleagues who said that it's not Jeff Bezos's job to underwrite a failing business with his money, and he can. Yeah. If he wants a failing documentary instead of a failing newspaper, he's completely in his right, and that's
Absolutely.
true.
Absolutely.
But I wonder how a guy with those resources who transformed global retail and just has brilliant business minds working for him and is into a million different things. It's not insurmountable. The New York Times is made a business of it. I don't think it had to fail this bad. It was almost like he stashed it in his back pocket, foreseeing he'd need some political capital 13 years later, and then cashed it in to please Trump. That's what it feels like. It's probably,
Well, I mean, look, when he was doing Democracy Dies in Darkness, that was political capital with the Biden administration.
Right.
And the fact is, owning a bullhorn, as Murdoch, of all people, can very quickly tell you, having a bullhorn in a major city, whether it's a cultural capital like New York City, where the Post is located, or Washington, D.C., where the federal government is located, is a useful thing for a private individual with his own sense of the news he wants to focus on and the issues he wants to blare about, which is, again, why Murdoch is here. Murdoch is not going to make money. You said it's going to be a success. The question is, what counts as a success? What is a success? Just like what is a market? Now, if a success is you get to make some noise in the bastion of liberalism and perhaps chip away at some corner of Newsom's —
that's what I think he's in for —
glitzy look, fine, but
Walter Sobchak, say what you will about National Socialism, at least that's an ethos. Say what you will about Rupert Murdoch, at least he knows what the fuck he's doing with newspapers, as opposed to Jeff Bezos. I mean,
well, he's a Nepo baby, obviously. He inherited his father's Australian papers and built on it far, far beyond anything his old man ever did. He's certainly an operator. He's had a few rather unfortunate problems out there, like, that whole thing with hacking phones in Britain that led to the closure of one publication and what should have been the sacking.
Gotta break a few hacks.
You're hacking into the phones of the victims of crime to find out what's going on with them so you can run stories on your front page. That's kind of as sleazy as it gets, really. So anyway.
I didn't say he was a good man. I just said he knows how to build a
news
audience.
I know he knows how to do it. I'm saying, spending your money doing this, priorities. Fine. Murdoch, The Bonfire of the Murdochs is the new book from Gabe, and he's a fine writer who is as good a Murdochologists has ever lived, and it'll be fun to see where that goes, I suppose. Murdoch's 94 or 5 now, and on his 7th wife, he has now resolved, to the tune of several $1 billion in buyouts, his disputes with 3 of his children.
He asked for a divorce through an email.
To Derry Hall. Yeah, he sent her saying it's over. It's working out. I guess we're done. Just to call my assistant and we'll arrange everything. So Mick Jagger wouldn't have done that, I don't think.
So let's talk about one of your favorite subjects, Disney, and Josh
D'Amaro. Actually, a lot of stuff's happened this week. It's like, oh my God,
We talked about that earlier, but like you had an angle in the newsletter where you talk about Iger's sort of resistance to the gaming business and how that might be opened up now.
Yeah, I would call it more indifference. It has seemed always to be well back in Iger's interests. And D'Amaro is over the games division when he was heading Experiences before his elevation this week. Well, technically it'll be in March, but before the papal, white smoke started spouting. They were supposedly in talks with some game companies for further deals. They made one big deal, and I thought it really mattered. And that was $1.5 billion into Epic Games, which already has like Tencent, one of the biggest game company in the world, is an investor. Sony's an investor. A bunch of other companies have a chunk of it. It does the Unreal Engine, which is this graphic engine that's used in games, but also for virtual production of all kinds, including The Mandalorian, the live action Lion King, et cetera, et cetera. It's in Jungle Book. So Disney uses it as a production tool. But they also did a deal for this Disney themed, and they call them islands in Fortnite, which also is owned by Epic. And Fortnite is many things now, far beyond its old battle royale beginnings. Actually, it wasn't even that before. Before that, it was just a shooter game. Then the battle royale thing took off, and it became like the communications platform for teenagers because everybody could get to it. Well, they've got a Disney themed island, so they've got a Marvel part and a Star Wars part and all these things over on this standalone separate experience within the Fortnite platform. So that makes a lot of sense. So where would they go next if they were going to do more stuff? And I suggested one obvious possibility might be to get a piece of EA while the Saudis, Jared Kushner's little investment company, and Silver Lake Partners buy it for $55 billion. Maybe they could take a stake in that, which I'm sure those guys wouldn't mind because that's a good pipeline for them into the biggest traditional studio. But then the other one is Roblox, where tens of millions of people who are Disney's next generation of fans are busily creating their own immersive and interactive experiences, playing them, creating them, becoming even entrepreneurial and becoming marketers and all the rest. And that's where Disney should have a presence in a really significant way. And Roblox is a publicly traded company, so could be done pretty easy.
Yeah, but is that something that like you just thought of, or is that seems really kind of straightforward and logical? Certainly somebody must have had a conversation about.
I have no illusions that I'm brilliant. So I'm guessing that somebody in strategic planning at Disney may have said, hey, if Bob's gone, maybe we could do this. I think it's probably been sitting in somebody's, tickler file for a while, but it should have happened to me. It should have happened years ago. So we'll see. I mean, I think games are an opportunity for them because they've checked, Iger checked a lot of boxes before he went out the door. He got Kathleen Kennedy out of Star Wars, fine. 60 billion into the experiences and resorts, great. So to glow those up, get some more cruise ships coming in, fix up the parks, put some new rides in there, update some other rides, great. Get ESPN the app launched finally. It's not going to replace the cable gold mine that used to be there, but it's important to have that. Okay. Didn't figure out ABC and the rest of linear, what's left of it, and it hasn't anything with games. And then you go, okay, so what else is there? Where else does tomorrow go? I think a lot of those things have been sort of taken care of for the moment, and he gets a chance to inhale. And Dana will still be running as president and chief creative officer, running all the film studios and TV stuff with that team, relatively unscathed other than perhaps some dings to her ego. I do think the other thing that was unavoidable for the board is, again, the shadow of the Trump administration. If Disney wants to do things, and they've shown no interest in acquisitions lately, but they might. Dana's long-time, 30-year friendship with Kamala Harris, including introducing Kamala to her husband, would be one of those things that would get in the way with this administration if she was CEO or co-CEO, which was the thing that was being considered. She's virtually a co-CEO.
What about Donald Trump's respect for women? I mean, he likes.
Oh, well, he's got that. He would just tell her she hasn't smiled at him lately, like he told Caitlin Collins.
So I don't know if you read Semaphore, which is like doing some of the best news reporting on the internet these days. They're just killing it. Liz Hoffman wrote about Larry Ellison kind of being over his skis. She termed it bringing a knife to a gunfight. He's trying to invest. He took out a $50 billion in financing and equity to invest in data centers. He's competing in the hyperscaler market with these giant companies that have all this cash flow, Amazon, Google.
But let's just to put this in perspective. In the last 2 weeks, several of the big seven reported their earnings. Most of them came out and said, yeah, we were going to spend 115 to 135 billion. I think that was Meta, might have been Google. Now we're going to spend 150 billion. Or I think one of them said $200 billion. So 50 billion, that's nice. You can get another nice boat for that, Larry. But 50 billion, and you're still locked into
right.
Software, the software stuff that they do.
Yeah, it's been described as an old school software company
Yeah.
competing with these just internet giants that have kind of exponentially more revenue.
And lots of ways to further train up their AIs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it just
And he's committing to $40 billion to back a major media merger. Seems ambitious.
just remember that 40 billion that he is backing it with depends on them getting all of Warner Brothers because they need the cash flow they would extract from the cable operations, even as they're cutting 6 billion in operational costs from the merged pair of companies. So it's when you hear those things, you go, okay, now I kind of understand a little bit more why Warner Brothers said Netflix more than the other guys. Because the reality is there is some stuff that's not so certain. You know, a whole lot of money at a time when Oracle's a little bit over over a barrel. I mean, it's a little vulnerable. If this bubble pops, like we just had a really bad week in the stock market a few days ago, and Oracle's share prices are down dramatically. Well, everybody had a huge day on Thursday after having 4 horrible days or 3 horrible days on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I mean, horrible days.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a huge day back, you retrace some of your steps, but you were at say 100, you went down to 87 and you went back up to 95. Well, that jump back up is big, but you're still 5 down from where you were 3 days earlier.
Right.
So you're not ahead. You're just not as far behind as you were. And the question is, at some point, that bubble will be a bubble. And where does somebody who's over there, already leveraged heavily both with their own business and then personally with his business of his sons, what does that end up being a problem? It probably won't, but it could. And there's reasons to ask those questions. And so Semaphor's writer that you mentioned is right, I think, to talk about that.
One last thought on the data center market. Elon Musk and SpaceX filed a application or document of some kind to the FCC to start building data centers in orbit of the Earth. Basically, this scheme would be underpinned by 1 million satellites, which is exponentially more than all we've launched in history. These would be solar-powered satellites that would power this massive data center operation that would be cooled by the frigidity of space. So you'd solve for 2 problems: electrical power consumption and cooling. And but it's kind of like we should be a multi-planet species. It's like, well, it sure sounds good. And he wears his tie. He was talking about it at Davos. And it sounds like he's got it put together and it's something that could actually happen.
I would say only that there are some challenges in that. And the reason why he has to actually make an application to the FCC is fine that you just put your data centers in space. How are they going to talk to anybody on the planet? Well, they're going to have to use bandwidth. And 1 million satellites. What are you going to do? Want to run like a Cat5 cable up there? Ethernet?
Leave it to Moffett-Nathanson, the equity analyst firm. Nick Del Deo titled his report about this gambit: data centers in space, the right stuff or a space oddity. Yeah, which is kind of hilarious, but
well, it is, and there's a couple issues. So low Earth orbit, the Lagrange points are certain equilibrium points in space for gravitational pulls from the Earth and the Moon, where you can park things and they just sit there. We've already got, they've got 9,000 satellites up there. We got a lot of space junk flying around. 1 million satellites is a lot of birds. You got to get them up there, which means you got to build rockets for them, which is great for SpaceX. But you get the propellant to get them up there, then you got to keep them up there. You got to build them in the first place. You got to have the bandwidth, have them talk. And I'm told, though I am not the person to talk about some of the issues with dealing with venting heat in space, but I'm told that there are more complications than merely saying, okay, open the vent and let it all out.
Yeah.
Because when you're like a couple of half degrees above absolute zero, there's some impacts on your equipment.
There's the whole gravity situation. I'm referring to the Sandra Bullock, George Clooney classic, where a cataclysmic event sort of triggers a cascading. One satellite shatters and it shatters more and more shatter.
Right. Well, when you've got the space junk you've got up there, which is what happened in gravity, since random space junk hit them and sent stuff going. You get the random space junk, and now all of a sudden you're putting 1 million satellites up there. Now, that's all being said. This is a little bit like Elon doing his Dr. Evil impression. $1 million, because, like, for instance, he said this time last year they would have 1 million cars, 1 million robo-taxis on the road by the end of the year. And his the person interviewing said $1 million. He says, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And they're nowhere close to that.
Conclusion is a lot of stoners have a lot of really out there ideas. For whatever reason, he gets to like get his out at major international conferences and they get taken seriously.
Right. Well, some of it is interesting and for the same reasons I read science fiction, but the point is they're couched in something that might, but there's lots of issues. And sometimes science fiction writers just make shit up so that they can tell a good story. And that sort of feels like sometimes what Elon does so he can get a good stock price. He kind of makes stuff up and if you hold him to it, I mean, he's killing off two of his now declining car line the declining sales of two of his car lines so that he can do more robots because robots are sexy and cool. And the X and the S are not in the Tesla cars anymore because he's basically burned that brand. So, the healthy skepticism is useful when he starts talking about this stuff because some of it could happen eventually. A lot of it probably isn't going to come anywhere as fast as he says it is. So we should
get speaking of healthy, we should probably get a good night's sleep. Let our producer take this thing. And anything else you want to?
No, I think I'm just glad to have the Super Bowl behind me. It was a gritty defensive game, which I kind of anticipated.
Who won the MVP?
I don't know. I was scrambling to do tech support on my stuff for this because we were right up against it, and I didn't stop more than a second after the final gun for the end of the game. So I'm going to guess Kenneth Walker because he had 120.
That's my guess too.
Yeah. So we'll find out if we're right soon enough. Anyway, that being said, this is David Bloom with Next TMT and the newsletter free in your mailbox every week. Should you sign up at nexttmt.com, and that's TM as in media T.com. You can sign up there to get it delivered. And this here podcast, Next TMT Talks, which is made each week on Sundays. And then we do one in partnership with Media Play News in the midweek. You can sign up for those as well. And I and my co-founder, Daniel Frankel, thank you very much for listening. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you,
everybody.